Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
I am the light. The one who follows me will have the light of life.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
May Christ be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Good News according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Christ.
As Jesus was leaving Jericho with the disciples and a large crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, begotten of Timaeus, was sitting at the side of the road. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout and say, "Heir of David, Jesus, have pity on me." Many people scolded him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the louder, "Heir of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him here." So they called the blind man. "Do not be afraid," they said. "Get up, Jesus is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, Bartimaeus jumped up and went to Jesus. Then Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Rabboni," the blind man said, "I want to see." Jesus replied, "Go, your faith has saved you." And immediately Bartimaeus received the gift of sight and began to follow Jesus along the road. This is the good news of Christ Jesus.
Praise to you, O Christ.
"I want to see," was Bartimaeus' answer to Jesus' question, "What do you want me to do for you?" What would be your answer? That question, Bartimaeus' answer, and a few of my experiences this past week led my thoughts in a totally different direction than I expected when preparing this homily. Yet, when I read the email giving me the link for today's Zoom liturgy, I was surprised at how similar this homily and the thoughts conveyed in that email are. I hope that with the help of the Spirit, I pulled all the thoughts whirling around in my head this past week together enough to make some sense of it for you. The first experience for me was listening to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s homily from 1963 entitled "Knock at Midnight." It was a wonderful interpretation of Luke's gospel from chapter 11. That's the parable about the persistent man knocking on his neighbor's door at midnight, one of the darkest times of night, asking for a loaf of bread. As I listened to that homily, though, I realized that the same words could be spoken today with few changes and be as appropriate for our time as it was 58 years ago. That saddened me. Dr. King bemoaned the fact that we were living in dark times in 1963 during the civil rights movement. I hasten to add that he did end on a positive note, reminding us that we need to continue to believe that Jesus is our strength, our refuge, and our light. With that said, I think we can all agree that the same feeling about dark times is generally felt today. Because I was preparing this homily, Bartimaeus came to my mind as all his days were experienced in darkness due to his blindness. The second experience was reading an article in last week's Seattle Times, which furthered my thoughts about the darkness of our time. The article was about the trending fictional drama from South Korea, the Squid Game. Have you heard about it? As I read about what it was all about, it sickened me. The premise of the game is that 456 people who are drowning in debt are invited to become contestants for a chance to win big bucks, close to $39 million in US currency, certainly enough to get out of debt. The games they play are children's games, like red light, green light. Did you play that as a child? The leader stands with his or her back to the rest of the players who sneak their way up to the leader without being caught moving when he or she says red and quickly turns around. The consequence of a person getting caught moving in the Squid Game is death. The goal of the game, of course, is to be the last one alive and rake in the money. I watched the trailer of the game, and that sickened me further, as it shows the first eliminations of the game, which was people being shot. The creators of the Squid Game defended against comparing it to Hunger Games by saying that these contestants can stop the game at any time if all of the remaining players agree to end it. And so it's their choice to keep going. And after all, it's just a game. My first thought about this came straight from my mother's mouth. The whole world is going to hell in a handbasket. Is it any wonder there are so many killings on our streets? Do we not value life at all anymore? Are we a society completely devoid of morals, now blinded by our false gods? To make things worse, the article went on to say that the game is a microcosm of our society. The financial picture for Koreans finds many underwater. The same can be said about Americans. But is that how important money, power, and fame is to us now, that we would risk our lives to get it? I keep reminding myself it's just a game, a TV show, but it's a perfect example of the small value we place on human life. And now we are passing that on to our children. There are many more violent games out there that both children and adults are playing. Everywhere we look, life is an expendable commodity, simply collateral damage. It used to be the bad guys, the mafia or the drug cartels killing people. These days, it is gang members killing other gang members, and all too often the police who fear for their lives shooting first, because our society has learned through the media and many of our politicians trying to be reelected or elected to fear our siblings of color, especially the males. The third experience that came to my mind when creating this homily was watching a film called Since I've Been Down. It's a documentary about Tacoma gangs and follows some of their members' days in prison. It's a perfect complement to the book we're reading in our Modern Mystics book club. The film explains how, when you live in poverty, at the bottom of the value hierarchy, have no or little parental love or guidance, and get kicked out of school because you're nothing but trouble, acceptance into a gang is belonging. That belonging piece is what drives young kids to allow gang members to put guns in their hands and kill people in drive-by shootings several times a week. Another example of the low value placed on life. The film also brings to light the many incorrect assumptions made by our government leaders that were made into laws, which in the end didn't decrease crime at all because it didn't address the root causes. At least this film has a brighter ending in that it shows the inmates, despite many of them knowing they will probably die in prison, initiate a program, the Black Prisoners Caucus, which is in only a few Washington state prisons. The BPC, as they call it, started quite a variety of classes, from the basic reading, writing, and arithmetic to anger management, journaling, and book clubs. They first looked for inmates who had a degree or some college to teach the courses, but found that just because you have a degree or more education does not make you a good teacher. So they got rid of that requirement, and the classes were taught by willing, enthusiastic inmates. Since prisons are often located in remote places, not accessible to many volunteers. From those beginnings, TEACH was created. TEACH stands for Taking Education and Creating History. The TEACH courses focus on the history of different ethnicities. These gang members who used to kill each other on the streets now get to know one another and their cultures and languages. That sure is an example of the Spirit working with these men to take those blinders off, discover the light of Christ within themselves and others, and share that light. So I ask you again, what would be your answer to Jesus's question? What do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus wanted to see. That's a logical answer for a blind man. But as the reading tells us, not only did he get the gift of sight, but he became a follower of Jesus. And hopefully, he was not only able to see, but he grew spiritually as well. Through my participation in the Just Faith Ministries Faith and Racial Justice program, I have learned how blind I have been to the plight of our siblings of color. How blind I've been to the many unjust and discriminatory policies and laws that have been passed, some of which I may have voted for, and others that I simply ignored. My answer to Jesus would, I believe, be like Bartimaeus's. I want to see. While I have my physical sight, I want to see better, wiser, through the lens of my siblings of all colors, ethnicities, faiths, genders, and economic status. I want people to value each other's lives and stop killing one another for sport or fun or in anger or passion. I want love and joy and peace and compassion to be in our news rather than hate and jealousy and power and divisiveness. I know it's up to me and you to bring that change to our dark world. And so in the end, I want God's continued help and guidance, the gifts of courage and tenacity to do whatever I can to bring Christ's peace here on earth. I believe that is our mission as followers of Christ. And I repeat to all of us what the people said to Bartimaeus. Do not be afraid. Get up. Jesus is calling you. Will you jump up as Bartimaeus did and go to Jesus? Will you give Jesus the answer to his question? What do you want me to do for you? Will you continue to follow Jesus with a renewed fervor on that good road and be the light that shines through the darkness of midnight for all to see? I would love to hear your thoughts on these readings. Don't forget to unmute when you're ready to talk.